AM 560, The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan, and in for Amy J this morning is former ABC7 political reporter Charles Thomas.
Good morning. Good to
morning.
Be here.
Good
a few hours of sanity to begin
the day.
Yes,
we try. We try, Charles. Thank you for contributing to that sanity. We appreciate it. A friend of mine, Dan Curry, who is a consultant with Restoration PAC, Chief Strategy Officer for Restoration for America. He's a really good messaging consultant, and I'm really, as people who listen to the show know, I'm really interested in political messaging, how you translate policy to persuasion, to votes. And he had a good piece over at American Greatness, amgreatness.com, providing an assessment, a postmortem, if you will, on Ron DeSantis' candidacy, and really challenging the premises of all of DeSantis' high-paid consultants. And then this is not being directed at our next guest, but it is being directed at some other people in DeSantis' world who I've spoken about before. Curry writes, most assume that DeSantis needed to be more aggressive in criticizing Trump, that he needed to neutralize Trump's support and pick up enough independent-minded conservatives to build his coalition. He needed to be the reasonable Trump, spend more time on liberal media outlets. Those strategies were doomed to failure. DeSantis ultimately took both of the above pieces of bad advice, and it sped his decline. Another path was preferable. DeSantis had no chance to go head on and change the minds of Trump supporters by criticizing him. He needed instead to convince Trump supporters that maybe he was even more in touch with America than Trump is. After all, Trump's main appeal is that he cuts through the layer of political BS that infects our campaigns and spells out our problems and solutions for real. That's what DeSantis did in Florida. That's how he rose to the occasion there. That's how he found success in Florida. And then, of course, actually implemented these policies, too, not just messaged them. He messaged himself out of the race, though, by not doing the same when he leveled up to the national level. Here's sort of the key, because, of course, nobody could have predicted the Trump indictments. Well, that's not true, because Trump was indicted once before DeSantis announced, and the other indictments were eminently foreseeable. But here's Curry's prescription, and I think this is on the mark. What DeSantis should have done after the Trump indictments, double down even more aggressively than the ex-president. He should have proclaimed loudly and often, America cannot tolerate such a weaponization of our justice system. He should have shouted from the rooftops about the J6 lies and persecutions, many of which victimized Florida residents. Wait, you say, wouldn't that just be reinforcing Trump's plight and message? Yes, because he'd do it more precisely and effectively. He could go to war with the liberal media over these issues. Instead, DeSantis went on mainstream media outlets and was tepid on the issues conservatives strongly care about. When he asked why he's running, if he agrees with Trump's messaging, he could say, I agree with Trump on the issues. I'm just a better messenger at this point. That's not what he said, messenger. What he said is, Trump failed and I will succeed. That's different. And that's the attack that he was convinced by, I guess, his consultants, and I mean, it's ultimately his decision to pursue. And of course, it backfired. Another crucial part of the strategy, he could have been equally forceful about getting to the bottom of all the COVID lies. This would have been in sharp contrast with Trump. He would have established himself as a bigger reformer of the system than Trump. You could argue the messaging path was too narrow and tricky to pull off. That's fair. However, it was his only path to victory in the primary. After all, there still remain many Republicans who are now supporting Trump, but were initially willing to give DeSantis a chance. And when they saw DeSantis on the playing field, he didn't resemble the gigantic warrior needed to take on extraordinary and unprecedented upheavals, the extraordinary and unprecedented upheavals America faces in 24. He looked like he was playing for second place, hoping Trump would succumb to the left's lawfare or would fall prey to health problems or worse. He played to lose, and he lost. I think that's a pretty good distillation. And I agree with Curry that it's fair to say it was a very narrow path. But if it was so narrow that it was impossible to traverse, then why'd you get into the race in the first place? You can't have it both ways. For more on this and then the election integrity issues that we had been discussing, and I want to pick up again, we're pleased to be joined by Ken Cuccinelli. Ken Cuccinelli is the national chairman of the Election Transparency Initiative and former Virginia Attorney General. And as I mentioned, he was also the head of DeSantis-aligned Super PAC, Never Back Down. Ken, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good morning.
So give me your reaction to Dan Curry's distillation of Ron DeSantis' messaging.
Well, first of all, I think that the whole premise presumes that the outcome might have been different if this thing or that thing had or hadn't happened. And I would go more fundamentally and say that I and many others expected the indictments that, as you noted, were predictable to weaken Trump. And in fact, they made him bulletproof with the Republican electorate. And that basically sums up how he became the presumptive nominee, is people rallied to him really pretty personally rather than viewing the problems that were, they're at least in part self-inflicted wounds. He gave the other side stuff to shoot at him with. They way overdid it. As I would say to people, he has 3.5 BS indictments against him. The half is the documents case where they have him for lying to his own lawyers to in turn lie to a grand jury. It would appear pretty intentionally. When your own lawyers are going to have to be the witnesses against you, you're not in a great place. It's the old, the cover-up is worse than the crime. But for the purposes, that isn't going to come to trial, frankly, in my view, before the election.
Right.
So back to the analysis, I was at the Super PAC. We tested every means you can imagine of challenging the president at various degrees of aggressiveness. Now, the campaign didn't do that, so they had to operate on their own.
Right.
But what we found was that bulletproofedness. The people who say we should have been more aggressive and so forth, I'll tell you just a little anecdote. I spoke for Governor DeSantis at one of the caucuses in Iowa, and I spoke to other people who had done the same thing on Monday, January 15th, that night. And all of us encountered the same thing. The Trump voters really like Ron DeSantis. They really like him. It was always but the sentence ended with, but fill in the blank, some form of, we can't let them get this guy, meaning the left, get Trump, or we have to stick with them, or we have unfinished business. The people who view the election from 2020 as unfinished business and think we won, want to go back and finish it. But it was, none of it was DeSantis. And
just
the presumption that something, look, no, you do it. Name one thing, name anything that could have been different that would have actually changed the outcome.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it would change the outcome. It's an imponderable, and that's the point of Curry's piece too in American Greats to say I don't know if it would. Trump probably would have won anyway. But I mean, but you would have had a better chance. Is my point. There would have been more opportunity. It was the better approach. This provided almost no opportunity. But the other thing, though, too, I understand you tested all these things, but the indictments were foreseeable, as you said. One of them had actually occurred. So then wasn't, the rallying around him once he got indicted and it started to get discussed, some of these indictments, because the first one was Bragg, and it's arguably the most ridiculous one.
Oh, yeah. It was worst of them all. Yeah.
Right. So you could see the rallying around happening real time almost. So how could you then think? Then why even run? Why even run if it's obvious?
So I was at the Super PAC, so I didn't have conversations with the governor.
Understand?
I don't speak for him or that campaign, but I think the answer to that is simply that you expect time to wear it down.
Mm-hmm.
And it was rather obviously, even when it was filed, it was the worst one. And it was going to be the worst one. I mean, he literally made up a legal theory for a crime, multiplied it 34 times, and filed it as an indictment. I mean, and you notice it hasn't gone anywhere. I think a left-wing judge, because that's what I expect to have the case, will dismiss that case before trial because there is no crime there.
All right, let's leave it there because I want to get to this other piece too. I mean, now we need to look prospectively, and I know you the Election Transparency Initiative and secure elections, and with this situation at the border and the number of people in this country illegally, obviously this is more salient than it's ever been. This is being dismissed. We were just talking about this. Jim Langford offered a shameful performance on the talk shows yesterday in defense of this Senate immigration bill, sort of dismissing the idea of illegals voting as, don't worry about it because federal law prohibits it. Yeah, that's not quite going to be good enough. I wonder, I know there was this report out by the Honest Elections Project on steps that should be taken. And it seems to me we need to drive this conversation, not because we're going to get federal action, but because it puts states on notice to deal with this at the state level. And so with respect to some of the vulnerabilities under the National Voter Registration Act, under the legislation, the statute governing overseas elections, what is it that you say and you would press secretaries of states and governors and legislatures to, hey, you got to address this. Let's get people's attention focused on this. Let's start talking this up.
So first of all, people should know that we are far better off than we were 4 years ago. But you've nailed it. Don't look for federal solutions. That is not going to happen. Frankly, we probably don't want it to happen.
Right.
It's in the states. And I live in Virginia, where we didn't have any change in the law between the 2020 election and 2021. And the Democrats had 2 years of control where they basically rewrote the laws for Democrats. So we ran under Democrat rules and had a Republican sweep, and we secured that sweep with the recruitment and training of over 4,000 new citizens who stepped forward not to be poll watchers, but to be election officials, to actually get in and help run the election, to work those poll books, to count the votes. And it was one of those folks who spotted the biggest cheat of that election in our biggest county, Fairfax County, where they were not following our voter ID requirements for absentee ballots by the hundreds, which also led to learning that was going on in 2 other counties. And that model's being followed all over. So yes, we're working to change the laws. The HEP report looked at Zuckbucks, for example. Over half the states have now banned Zuckerbucks. These are dollars known because Mark Zuckerberg provided them in the 2020 election through nonprofits. So he got tax deductions to essentially pay government offices to do voter turnout that normally the Democrat Party would have to do. And in the last 4 years, we've gotten rid of that in over half the states, including the majority of swing states, which is obviously a big deal. So Arizona, for example, Pennsylvania, my home state of Virginia, and you notice Pennsylvania and Virginia, that had to be bipartisan, and it was. It wasn't everywhere. On Louisiana this last go-around, they had it as a ballot measure, and the voters voted for it by, I want to say, 76%. So major improvements in laws have been made, including in swing states. Georgia, rather famously, the Dems were attacking them like crazy for reforming and cleaning up their election laws, as they did in 2021. And they went back in 2022, did it again, North Carolina as well. But we saw the explosion. The president of the United States, Joe Biden, calling them Jim Crow 2.0 and so forth. And then in the 2022 midterms, what happened? The highest minority turnout ever in a midterm. And one of these universities did a survey after the election, and they're, of course, all left-wing, and found 0% dissatisfaction with the Georgia election systems among black voters, and nearly identical favorable views between black and white voters, around 73%, literally within a few tenths of a percent of one another. So the whole notion that cleaning up elections is somehow racist or hurts minorities, which I personally think should be offensive to minorities, was blown to hell in 2022. And that whole narrative was exploded by reality. And at the Election Transparency Initiative, where I have worked for a number of years, we continue to press ahead in especially the first half of 2024 to get a few more legislative changes, cleanups, that will help secure the elections in 2024 and beyond. It's important that this not just be a presidential cycle undertaking.
Ken Cuccinelli, National Chairman of the Election Transparency Initiative, former Virginia Attorney General as well. Ken, thank you as always.
Yeah, good to be with you. Have a great day.
And Ken joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook, or read about it in the paper. Hear it here first. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Balance of Nature's fruits and veggies supplements, changing the world